you don't follow sport, you probably remember the moment 3 Australian Test cricket players were involved in tampering with the ball.
To all of my teammates, to fans of cricket all over the world, and to all Australians who are disappointed and angry, I'm sorry. What happened in Cape Town has already been laid out by Cricket Australia. Tonight, I want to make clear that as captain of the Australian cricket team, I take full responsibility. I made a serious error of judgment, and I now understand the consequences.
It was a gut-wrenching time for anyone in the sport, for fans, and especially for Justin Langer. After his own successful playing career and a coaching stint with Western Australia, it would be Justin Langer who'd have to step up to take on the coaching role of the Aussie cricket team at a time of turmoil. With the team's reputation in tatters, fans bewildered, and the media hungry for the story, it would be Langer who'd have to rebuild, restore and rejuvenate Australian cricket. It would be Langer who'd have to address those cultural issues in the team, and Langer who'd have to take the team to the other side of the world to face the hostile English fans for the Ashes and the World Cup. In his leadership toolkit, an unwavering belief in the power of mindset and meditation to overcome any curveball. This interview, well, it's one of the best lessons you'll learn about how to lead during a crisis. I'm Kelly Reardon, and this is Curveball. It's about people who thrive in challenging times. We take you inside the minds of some of the most brilliant leaders to unpack how they ride the highs, but also how they stare down stress, setbacks and the lows, and then still keep on going. Justin Langer's the coach of the Australian men's cricket team, a role he stepped into at a particularly challenging time following the so-called sandpaper scandal. 3 Australian players, including then captain Steve Smith, were banned from the game, and coach Darren Lehmann was also forced out. Justin was the leader Cricket Australia and the nation turned to find a way back out of this dark moment for the sport. And today he's in his home office in Perth. G'day, JL.
How are you, Kelly?
Really well. Can you describe for me what it's like that very first time you put on that famous baggy green, that weird little hat that you get when you're selected to play Test cricket for Australia?
I guess for me it was about the dream. And I remember when I was 11 years old, the great Dennis Lilly was bowling to the great Sir Vivian Richards at Boxing Day, at the Boxing Day Test match. On the last ball of the day, the crowd, Lilly, they're all screaming his name, runs in and he bowls Viv Richards on the last ball of the day. And it was in the Langer household, and I'm 11 years old, and there's Australian cricketers. Dennis Lilly's got his buttons undone down to his belly, but he's got the big moustache and the big mane of hair, big hairy chest. Viv Richards and the boys, and there's 80,000 people at the MCG. And as an 11-year-old kid, I thought, oh my gosh, imagine if I could do that one day. And that's where the dream started. So when you first get it, I remember I turned up to Adelaide, and when you walk into the hotel room, 2 things happened. I found out 24 hours before my first test because someone got injured. I walk in and first, this is in 1993, I walk into the hotel and there at the bar are all my heroes, Alan Border, David Boone, and they're all having a beer the night before the game. Like, it's all changed these days, but they're all there. So I've got to then introduce to my new teammates who are my heroes. So that's a weird experience. And then I went up to my room. There's a big cardboard box on my bed in my room. And on the top it said, Justin Langer, Australian Test cricketer. Oh my gosh. And I rip off the box and I pull out all this stuff. And there's this thing called a baggy green cap. And I remember it's no longer a baggy green cap or the baggy green cap. This is my baggy green cap. And then putting it on my head, undoing my buttons down to my belly button, playing shots. And I thought, this is a magic moment. But what you quickly learn, and I've learned this about life, is the dream then becomes a reality. And the next day I'm playing Test cricket, and my gosh, you're alive. And I remember a great friend of mine from the SAS once told me, JL, most people can live the dream. Not many people can live the reality. In other words, a lot of people want the green beret or the baggy green cap or drive a fancy car or live in a fancy house or be the CEO or be the leader. Everyone can dream about that, but not many people can live the reality of it, because that's where the journey begins.
So it's such an exciting moment for you personally and for your family and for the rest of the teammates who I'm sure are so excited for you. Your heroes are in the pub. So contrast that then for me, what it was like for you, a former Australian cricketer then and a coach in WA and someone who spent a lifetime involved in the game, and the news of the sandpaper scandal in South Africa breaks. What was that like for you?
I remember sitting on the couch. My wife was in London, surprising my eldest daughter for her 21st birthday, and so she was all out of the country. And I was sitting on the couch and I was watching with my youngest daughter, Gracie, and I remember watching the highlight. I said, "Oh, Gracie, pray that's not Cameron." She goes, "What do you mean, Daddy?" I said, and I knew it was, because Cameron Bancroft's got big hands, and I remember thinking, what have you done? And then it all hit, and then, my gosh, I was, as a former player, and he was one of because I was coach of Western Australia at the time, Cameron, you could line up 10,000 people and he'd be the last person that would put to do what he did. And that would probably talk about what the environment was like in the change room at the time, potentially. But I was so sad. I was so angry. I reacted. The next day, Kelly, I went to the Fremantle markets here in Perth. I've been doing it for the last 5 years with my second daughter, my hippie daughter, Ali Rose. And for 5 years, that's our date whenever I'm home Sunday morning. Anyway, for 5 years, no, we just go there, drink our coffee, talk rubbish. Everyone's polite. That next morning, I had people coming, JL, what has happened? What's happened to the Australian cricket team? People getting upset, people getting angry. And then the following day, on the Monday, I went to the West Coast Eagles' new facility. That was a big construction site. I reckon I had 300 Aussie blokes in their high-vis jackets, pushing their wheelbarrows, holding their drills. What has happened to the Australian cricket? And it made me realise how much the Australian cricket team meant to Australians. And that was the moment where, wow, I knew it was real.
I want to go back and play just a moment from Steve Smith at the press conference.
I'm sorry, and I'm absolutely devastated.
I've got 3 sons of my own who sleep and breathe cricket, and they absolutely cherish you. What do you have to say to the kids?
Firstly, that I'm deeply sorry. I love the game of cricket. I love entertaining young kids. I love kids wanting to play the great game of cricket that I love. Anytime you think about making a questionable decision, think about who you're affecting. You're affecting your parents, and to see the way my old man's been.
Thanks, everybody.
And my mum, it hurts.
It's so hard to listen to that, like even for me. What was it like for you and then the whole cricket community when that news broke that Steve Smith, Cameron Bancroft, who you mentioned, and Dave Warner had been involved in this ball tampering, and seeing that press conference? You know, you're in WA and you're watching that.
Yeah, it's heart-wrenching. It's even more heart-wrenching for me to listen to that now, because I know Steve Smith. I knew him as a great player. I didn't know him really personally. We were together around when Phil Hughes died, so we were at the hospital together when that happened. I loved him as a player, and I love him as a person now, but I didn't know him really as a person. Now I do, and I listen to that. I mean, seriously, that gives me a really heavy heart listening to it. And Cameron Bancroft, I picked him up from the airport from South Africa. And I remember him dragging me into the toilet. He went into this little VIP area because obviously the media frenzy was huge. and he dragged me into because I asked him straight after, what did you do? And he dragged me into the toilets, and he got very emotional and said, mate, the thing that hurt me most is I didn't tell you the truth first up, because he and I have had a long-term friendship. So I listen to that stuff now, and it's heart-wrenching. They made a big mistake. I remember getting asked in my very first press conference when I was appointed, will you welcome back Steve Smith and Dave Warner and Cameron Bancroft? And I said without hesitation, yes, I will. And I said, there's not one person listen to this podcast. There's not one person watching this interview or this press conference hasn't made a mistake in their life. These kids made a mistake, and they were penalised heavily for it. And they've come back. Outstandingly well. So, but listen to that. That's very hard to listen to.
It's interesting because when you reflect on leadership and what leadership really is, the thing that, because I was watching that press conference earlier this morning, and I remember at the time thinking this, and then I was reminded of it today when his dad, Steve Smith's dad, comes over and puts his hand on Steve Smith's shoulder. And I remember being so struck at the time about what a fantastic family they were and how supportive. That's great leadership from his dad. I'm going to stand by you. You've done something stupid. How important is it that everyone, while everyone was disappointed, that there was a sense that you can come back from this?
Well, I think one of the most important things I've learned about leadership is you must care for people. You must care for them, and you must make them feel special. And sometimes I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you now without incredible mentors in my life. And those mentors, often the toughest on me, actually, but now they're still the people I respect and admire and I love the most. They're my closest friends. But the reason they were tough on me was because they cared for me and they pulled me. And you find out in the hard times who your friends really are. And it's crucially important, and especially in the world we live in today. I mean, the hysteria, and it can be such a mean world. I mean, with social media, even media. I mean, you're trying to fill 24 hours of the day of media. I mean, anyone can, and they forget about who it affects. They don't think about the sports person or the politician or the whoever as a human being. They see it as their public persona, if you like.
After that press conference, things then happened pretty fast. So we had the press conference, the players returned home. At what point did it become obvious that then coach Darren Lehmann would also lose his job?
Well, it was fun. I picked up Cameron Bancroft from the airport. We went and did his press conference at the Wacker. And because I'd agreed to do that, it meant that my other three daughters were all going down to my beach house. So we went a day late. Anyway, we arrived down at the beach house and I'm just about to open a bottle of beer because it's been a stressful time. And I get a phone call from my great mate, Jeff Marsh. He goes, mate, you're watching the TV? You've got to watching the TV? I said, no, I've just got to Mandurah. He goes, mate, quick, turn the TV on. And there was Darren Lehmann resigning. And I'll never forget my daughters looking at me going, what does that mean, Dad?
And did they? So was it that quick for you as well?
Oh, well, I knew that now it wasn't hypothetical. What happens if Darren Lehmann, or what happens when Darren Lehmann one day stops being the coach of Australia? It became real. It was literally happening right. And then my wife rang me from London. Darren Lehmann, what does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? I went, oh, darling, don't worry about it.
What she's really saying is, are you leaving Perth? Are you leaving Perth?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
So, I mean, before this, though, you'd been a very successful player, you'd been a very successful coach in WA. So I'm sure you had perhaps your eyes set on that coaching position. I might be the next coach of the Australian team. However, the way it's transpired, it's a poisoned chalice in many ways for you to take on. Did you pause and give it some thought?
I did for a second, but I always thought maybe 2 or 3 years down the track. I thought about it for a second, but I love Australian cricket. I've been doing it, I've done it for a long time. I honestly felt a responsibility And I knew that the other thing is, when we talk about leadership, it's crucial to do an apprenticeship. And 7 years before, I'd taken on West Australian cricket when they were in crisis as well. So I was very fortunate. There's no way I could have done that job without having had done an apprenticeship. And I laugh with kids these days. I mean, the young players or my kids, they want to have the Mercedes-Benz without doing the work. You know, they want to have that, but that's not how life works. So I'd done the apprenticeship, and I'm very thankful that I had gone through the hard yards for 7 years in West Australian cricket and learned a lot of lessons before taking on this role, which was going to be a lot different job, but still with the same, dealing with people and dealing with the same sort of challenges.
How confident were you then that you could turn it around?
I was more confident because I'd done it for 7 years before, and I'd learned incredible lessons in that time. And I knew what it would take. And one of those things in leadership, you must know what you stand for. You must know what your vision is. You must know what you stand for, because if you do that, then you have a foundation or a recipe that works, or a blueprint that you know works. So I was thankful for that. I always say, when you talk about leaders, you should be able to write on a table napkin what you stand for. And if you can do that, that's your foundation. And I'm sure a lot of people aren't exactly certain. So I'd learned that from not only watching great Australian cricketers, learning from great leaders outside of the game, inside of the game. I'd learned from what worked, what hadn't worked. And I was able to then be very, very clear what I stood for. So there was the first time when I had my first press conference, crystal clear. Second time when I walked into the room and addressed the players for the first time, crystal clear. When I spoke to my staff, crystal clear.
So take me inside that first meeting in the players' room. You walk in there. This is your first time as coach of the Australian cricket team. They're at their lowest point. What did you say to them?
Well, I was nervous, and they obviously know. They obviously know my persona, right? So I walked in there. I said, "Guys, this is where we're at," and it's actually a classic story, because I walked in. I was nervous. I said, "This is where we're at," and we acknowledged where we'd come from. This is what's going to happen moving forward. I said, "Our role is to make Australians proud of us." And if you think about nothing else when you get out of bed, I don't care about batting, bowling, catching. Because making Australians, that includes your mum and your dad and your grandparents and your brothers and sisters and your kids and your mates and the broader Australian public. So that's one thing. Second thing is, we're going to develop you as people, and we're going to develop you as players. And the third thing is, we're going to live by these 5 values or behaviours: professionalism, honesty, humility, learning and mateship. And I went on and I talked to them why that was important. And then I went back to my hotel room. Big sigh of relief. I've got through that. And then I sent them all a message, and just to reinforce the message. And I said, thumbs up if you're in, thumbs up if you're not. And within milliseconds, I got all these thumbs up. I'm in. So I knew that was the starting point. But the other thing is, Kelly, is that it's easy there's an old saying in life: you can preach excellence. If you preach excellence and walk mediocrity, you're nothing but a common liar. So in other words, I can get up there and I can do all the fancy speeches. That's the easy bit. I can put the vision up. That's the easy bit. Then you got to roll your sleeves up, executing the plan and being on the behaviours every single day. That's the tough bit.
So I want to ask you about that, because you have been very consistent about instilling this new set of behaviours. And as you know, changing culture, like culture doesn't happen overnight. You can't fix it overnight, but you also can't, sort of a bad culture doesn't just develop overnight either. And I'm just wondering how much you've reflected on whether some of what happened with the ball tampering, that sense of pressure, win at all costs, highly competitive, could have even stemmed as far back as the teams that you played in the war era where, he was such a strong and fierce competitor. Just give me a sense of, the values in the team at that time and how it's changed over time.
Well, I wasn't there, obviously, but let's not forget that there's not one champion sports person, there's not one champion in life, in any art, who isn't incredibly competitive. I mean, that's reality. I mean, that's just, and when you play a game, you play to win or lose. So you play to win. I mean, if I play with my girls, mate, you like to win, don't you? You play Scrabble, you win or you lose.
But somewhere along the line, it tipped. It tipped over from just that into something else.
Yeah, it did. And I reflect, if I try and be as objective as I possibly can be, and now having lived this life for 3 years, my take on it was that these guys got very, very, very tired. And they play. I mean, one of the great things about COVID is I joked in the winter, the only thing I don't love about COVID is COVID, because I was actually, last year I was on the road for 300 days of the year.
Yeah, it's incredible. 300
days of the year, right? So that means I don't see my family. I don't live in my bed. I don't drink my coffee at home. I don't see my friends. I look back on it, I think these young guys, Steve Smith had the responsibility also of being captain. Dave Warner was the vice captain. Cameron Bancroft just came into this new environment. You get tired. And as a parent, you know what it's like at night time when you're really tired and your kids, read me another story, and you try and read it a bit quicker and you want things to happen a bit quicker. Then you get tired, you do some dumb stuff. So that's the only way I'd look at it. Maybe they got tired. They want things to be over quicker. And then you get tired, you get touchy, you get more touchy, you get more distracted, by criticism. You get more distracted by what's happened in the past, what could happen in the future. They made a big mistake.
You were given a 4-year term, so that kind of meant, 2 Ashes series, the World Cup in England. What was the first 6 months for you like in the role?
After the first 6 months, I was sitting at the, we'd just played India. We went to England. We lost 5-0 in one-day series. We went to Pakistan. We went to Dubai, played Pakistan. We lost that series. Then we came home. We lost against India 2-1. And we were in Sydney. And it was so I was 6 months into the job. And my wife, I've been going out with my wife since I was 15 years old. So she's grown up with all this. And we were sitting at the breakfast table on the day 3 of the Sydney Test match against India. And she's sitting there with my 4 daughters. They come over from Melbourne and Sydney Test. They've done it since they were babies. And sitting at breakfast, she's flying back to Perth with the girls. I'm going to work at the SCG. And she starts bawling her eyes out at the table. I said, "What's wrong with you?" She doesn't cry much. She goes, "I don't like what this job's doing to you. I don't like what it's doing to us. I don't like what people are saying about you and the team. They don't even know who you are." That probably sums up my first 6 months. It was really, really tough. And, we had the whole world wanted to see us fail, and fair enough. And also, I talk about Mother Cricket. It was almost like Mother Cricket saying to us, "You know what, we're going to keep smacking you because you deserve to be smacked." And I was working, we were working so hard. I was learning about our players. The players were learning about me. We were getting smashed publicly. I was talking about it being white noise. I used to be the master of white noise, but I was telling all the players not to let it affect them. It was affecting me. So that old preach excellence, walk mediocrity. People can smell it and see it from a mile away. So the first 6 months was really, really hard.
That can happen in life where you make a big life decision or a big change in a company, or you strike out as a leader with a big, bold vision, and for whatever reason, kind of people aren't on board, or it's a tough thing. And then you feel like, okay, so the universe should reward me now with lots of good luck and whatever. And then you just get setback after setback after setback. And so take me into your mind then, especially when you're looking across the dining table at your wife who's in tears and about to, fly a couple of 100 kilometres west. What made you keep going?
Well, one, I'm passionate about the job. 2, I look back on my life. I'm 50 years old now. And I talk about this, I've talked about it for years, but as a 50-year-old man, I look back on my life and think the toughest times in my life, at the time, you can't see past the end of your nose. They're the worst time in your life. As a 50-year-old looking back, they're the best time in my life. I've learned so much. And I say, when you go through hard times, you've got two choices. You either quit or you get better. You quit or you get better. You can only get better by learning from it. And it's almost, but I look back, I was a 22-year-old kid playing Test cricket for the first time. We talked about it at the start of this interview. I got my baggy green cap. 4 months later, I get dropped. But in that period, and I honestly, I thought I'd never play for Australia again. I'm a failure. I'm no good. What are you going to do, Justin? Are you going to get better, or are you going to? And I had to get better in all areas. I learned back in that time, I learned transcendental meditation, and I've meditated every single day since. And it's transformed. It's such an important part of my life. I had to get fitter, so I trained. That's an important part of my life. I look back on the tough periods of my life, even, and I'm getting a bit sentimental here, but about 3 years ago, my best friend died of a heart attack, dropped dead. 2 months later, my mum died of ovarian cancer. So within 2 months, my best friend and my mum died. You can't see past the end of your nose. But now, 3 years later, I look at it, I think, I take great strength from the fact, if that's the worst thing that can ever happen in your life, you get through it. You get through it. You learn lessons. And the lesson was you can get through it, as silly as that sounds. So you have a choice, you quit or you get better, you learn from it. And that's at that time when I could have thought, yeah, this is too hard. No, that's not me. I want to roll my sleeves up. I want to learn from it, and we're going to keep getting better.
I want to lean into that example where you do make your Test debut, I think in 93, super exciting, it's all great. And at one point you are in England and you're struggling to get runs, you're away from home, you're in your hotel room and there's a knock and it's Steve Waugh and it's not great news. How did that all go down?
Yeah, that was the second time I was dropped in 2001 when I was 31 years old. So Steve Waugh, Steve Waugh, talk about great leaders. I'd run through a brick wall for Steve Waugh any day of the week. Such is my admiration and respect for him. And he wouldn't ask me to do things he wouldn't do or didn't think I could do. So he's a legend. So he knocks on my door, 2001, before the first Test match, and I was not expecting it. He said, "You're not playing the first Test." I didn't know whether to punch him or hug him. Honestly, I didn't know what to do. And I went and sat down and, oh, my God. And then for the next 10 weeks, I did what a lot of Aussie blokes do. I trained harder. I hit more balls, but I didn't talk to anyone. And I got worse and worse. And I played the practice games. I wasn't playing the Test matches. I got worse and worse and worse. I was batting worse than the pen in my hand at the moment. But I thought 31, I'll never play for Australia again. And then what happened is that before the fourth Test match, Steve Waugh got injured and there's a spot up for grabs. And I'm going, right, this is my big chance. Come on, I tried harder and harder and I failed again. So I didn't get picked. And I remember going back to my room and Adam Gilchrist and John Buchanan grabbed me off the bus after that game. He goes, "I'm going to have a beer." I said, "No, I'll be fine. I want to work this out for myself." That had worked really well for me, Kelly. And I sat with those two guys and I spoke to them for about 4 hours and I just talked, I cried and I got angry and I was banging the thing. But I spoke and Aussie blokes don't talk enough. And I learned the great lesson. It was like spewing out cancer. And the next night I caught up with Steve Waugh and I told him how I'd been feeling. And he goes, "Wow, this is a great lesson for me in leadership as well. I didn't realise you were feeling like that." And then as it turns out, a week later, the next thing that happened, I ring my wife again. We're in Brighton. I told her I'm quitting. I'm coming home. And she said, no, don't come home. I'll fly over. And she flew over my third daughter, who was a month old, within 24 hours notice, flew to England. I'd spoken to my mates again. I'd spoken to the captain. I'd spoken to the coach. My wife flies over.
You'd spoken to them to say, "I'm out, I'm done"?
No, I'd had that conversation about how they'd let me down and I felt like it was the end of the world. But I'd actually just spoken to them. I hadn't spoken to them for 10 weeks between getting dropped. And I thought, well, my wife flies over, I see my little baby again. I think, well, if I never played for Australia, I got my mates back. They know how I feel, and I've got my family and my friends. And then as life works out, a week later, I get selected to play for Australia and open the batting with Matty Hayden.
So
then I play for the next 5 years.
So this is an incredible moment, because yes, you're literally on your knees at this point in time. You just can't see a way out. You've called your wife to say, I'm flying home with you on the next plane to Perth. You then get this extraordinary call up to open the batting with Matthew Hayden, and that becomes an incredible partnership between the two of you that goes on for some time. Can you give us a sense of how you developed that partnership with Haydos?
Well, we were friends. We're almost like he and I had very similar journeys. We both came in young. We kept getting told we weren't good enough. We played a lot of domestic cricket and played well. We got dropped a few times, and we were just great mates. We had great values. We had very much shared values in life, and just great mates. So then, when I get the chance to open the batting, I'd never opened before. Come on, big fella, let's go and open the batting. No worries, little fella, let's go. It was like we were going on a fishing trip.
Which he doesn't mind to do, right? He quite enjoys fishing.
Yeah. Unbelievable. And it was like every time we went out to bat, it was like just two great mates going on to take on the opposition. And we forged this great friendship, and it just added to the bond. Those guys are like my brothers, Kelly. Honestly, I spent more time with them than I did my blood brothers. Haydos, Adam Gilchrist, Steve Waugh, Damien Martin, they are literally like my brothers. They are, and I love them. And it's one of the great things about team sport. Those guys are like my board of directors, not just my friends and my brothers. So if I need any advice as the coach of Australia, guess who I go and speak to?
And you get a sense of that in the Test, the Amazon Prime documentary series that you made, because you kind of at one point you pull in Ricky Ponting and you're pulling in the guys all the time to help you out, and you do get a sense of this almost like the uncles are here to kind of help out the Australian cricket team. I did want to ask you about the Test, because Cricket Australia, quite early after the ball tampering incident, decides to team up with a production company to make the documentary series. Was it a big decision to allow them to follow you for the Ashes, especially because you're at the height of trying to turn this thing around, you're early in your career, the Australian press is after you, the English fans are totally, feral, brutal.
Yeah.
What made you decide to let a camera crew in on all of that?
I had no idea. That's the truth. The truth is, I did my first press conference when I was announced as the coach. I jumped in. It was a whirlwind 24 hours. I had obligations back in Perth. I flew to Melbourne, did my press conference, flew home. And as I'm in the taxi, driving from the hotel to the airport, I've got this cameraman asking me questions. I thought it was just another part of another interview to fit it all in. We turn up to England for my first tour, and there he is again.
So this was planned. Was this pre-planned before?
I had no idea. I had no idea.
So it's not like they came on board after the scandal. They were already filming.
No, it all started in my first press conference. So someone had and it was weird. And then a few weeks in, we're doing this documentary, and then it was really, really confronting. Thankfully, Andre, the cameraman, became my style is that they come into our team, they're part of the family. And he's a stand-up comic, so he used to tell the joke of the day every day. That was how he sort of earned his stripes from the boys. We got some trust in him. And even before the first episode, I was so nervous, but they did a great job. I think they portrayed the team very well. And it was warts and all. I heard after that it might have been a public relations gig, mate. To me it was warts and all. I didn't even know. By the end, I didn't even know he was in the room, and I was really nervous what would come out.
Did you ever wish they weren't there? You wanted to boot them out. You're having a really tough discussion.
I did a few times. Yeah, I had to say, Andre, please, you can't film this, or Andre, you got to. And it was respectful. I mean, we built the trust in each other. And he was very respectful of that. But I say to people, imagine coming every day at work, you're at work, or a CEO, or every board meeting, and everything you say is getting recorded for 18 months.
Yeah, it's tough.
It was tough. And as great as the documentary come out, the day after the Ashes, when Andre stopped filming, it was like a breath of fresh air. Not because Andre's a great guy and the documentary was a great success, but it was just like, oh my gosh, I don't have to watch every single move. I don't have to, every time I say, oh, can we put this microphone in your, you know, it was a relief actually, but I'm sure the world we live in, there's going to be a lot more of it.
There is this moment where you get very frustrated at a loss, and it's a little bit unlike you, I have to say, because you do lose your cool and you sort of kick a waste paper basket over. And I hear that you actually tried to get them to take out that footage.
Yeah, I did. I remember standing at the front of my house, and two things happened. One, we were able to watch the episodes before they came. Or we had to give them a tick. And firstly, my third daughter Sophie, who came to England as a baby, and she watched the first two episodes as almost like a set of eyes for me. And she got this look on her face. She goes, "Dad, it's the first time in my life I've ever seen you angry. I didn't believe you got angry." And I said, well, that's a compliment. Hopefully, as a dad, they don't see me get angry. But she got this look, and I said, "Oh, that's interesting." But then I remember out the front of my house, I rang the producer. I said, "You cannot put that bit of me kicking over the bin." He goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Mate, people think I'm a psycho. I kicked the bin. You know, Nathan Lyon's the biggest test. We're about to lose the Ashes, and we've got 3 runs, and it's a simple move, and I kicked the bin out of frustration." He goes, "Yeah, but did you see what you did next?" I said, "What do you mean what I did next? I kicked the bin and we're going to lose and da-da-da." He goes, "Yeah, but you picked up all the rubbish, mate." I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "What do you mean I picked up all that?" He goes, "Watch it again. You picked up all that." And one of your values is humility.
Yeah, it absolutely looks like that to the viewer as well. Like you lose it, you kick the bin, then you take a breath, and then you go and start picking up banana peels and bits of tissue and Band-Aid and put it back in the bin.
And he said, "You talk about, you know, walking the walk." And he said, one of your values is humility. And there it is right there. So we've got to put it in. I said, "Oh, no worries." But everyone asked me about that scene from the documentary.
This is Curveball and I'm Kelly Reardon. My guest today is the coach of the Australian cricket team, Justin Langer. Justin, you mentioned earlier on that you are quite the convert to transcendental meditation. And in fact, I've heard that when you get into a hotel room, the first thing you do is scan around and try to find a spot to meditate. How did you first get into it?
I was so funny. When I was 1993, so I was 23 years old. I talked about having my baggy green cap. We played in New Zealand. The Ashes is coming up to selection after this series, and I got a duck in both innings in the third test match. And a guy by the name of John Wright, who's an old, tough opening batsman, played 100 tests for New Zealand. He walks up to me in the change room after the game, and he's got a cigarette and a stubby in his hand. And he was like the old bull giving the young bull some advice. He goes, "I've been watching you. You know, you're a talented little player, but you're trying too hard and you're too stressed out. You need to relax." He said, "I think you should try transcendental meditation." I said, "What is that? Transcendental meditation?" I didn't know what he was. I nearly fell off my seat, actually, especially coming from him. Anyway, I got dropped from the Ashes, end of the world, can't see past the end of my nose. And I was at home and I opened up the West Australian newspaper, and there's this big advertisement, "Learn transcendental meditation." And the universe is talking to me, right? So I still remember Derek from Smythe Road, Claremont. And I rang up Derek from Smythe as a 22-year-old. I rang up Derek, 23. I said, he goes, "Yeah, no worries. Come and visit my house and I'll teach you transcendental meditation." So I went there, and I've been meditating every day since. So it's a big part of my life.
Tell me what happens. Like, what is your process around it? What is happening in your mind? How long do you do it for?
Every morning. So when you talked about my hotel room, I walk, because it's almost like, because my life's so transient, I'm like a gypsy, because we're in a hotel room 300 days of the year. So I've got to find a piece of my, first, routine's important in my life. Humans are very habitual, and routine's very important, I think, for mental health and physical health. So I look around the room, I find I've got a couple of great spaces at home where I can meditate. But I look around my room, I put a cushion down, so the next morning I know that's where I'm going to meditate. So I sit there, I've got a thing called Insight Timer on my phone, and I have 30 minutes, but I usually, and at the 10-minute mark, I get a little tiny little bell ring, and the 20-minute mark, and then, so I do 20 minutes or 30 minutes every day, every morning. I sit in a very comfortable position with my legs crossed, and Transcendental Meditation is about a mantra and having a mantra in your mind. So you come back to the mantra because we've got thoughts going everywhere, and when you recognize that you're not concentrating on your mantra, you come back to the mantra. And
is the mantra something, from the ancient Sanskrit texts and things like that?
That's right. That's right. And that's what Derek taught me, what the mantra was. And I still, but now I'm more just concentrate on my breathing. And it doesn't matter whether it's a symbol or a mantra or you're breathing, as long as you come back to something. And what it taught me in my game, concentration was so important. And you get concentration is hampered when you get distracted. So it's a way of practicing coming back to one thing. And in the game of cricket, it was about coming back to the ball. In meditation, it's about coming back to the breath or the mantra or the symbol. So that's how it came around. And I think it's been physically helpful. It's been mentally very helpful for me. And I've met some great people on the way because of it.
Do you use the same mantra all the time, or are you drawing on, I'm a yoga teacher, so I've done a bit of mantra training. You can choose different mantras that have different meanings and are related to the different Hindu gods. Do you do that?
No, I have the same mantra that I had from when I was 22, 23 years old. But as I say, most of my meditation now through studying different Zen philosophies and talking to different meditation teachers, most of it now comes back to my breathing, and I don't worry about the mantra. But I go through different stages, but as long as I'm meditating on something every day, then that's the important part of it.
Do you encourage the other players that you coach now to use TM?
No, I don't. It's a bit like spirituality or religion. The most important thing to me about leadership, whether it's for my kids or my players or in the community, is example. So people know I do it, and if people want to come and talk to me about my beliefs or my meditation or my physical training, then that's fine. But I would never like to force my beliefs or my routines on anyone. I think that's all part of the journey of their lives or their careers.
You're very big on process and learning from what happens and applying that process. And I'm wondering how that discipline has helped your perseverance in the face of setbacks or failures or when things aren't going well.
Well, my favourite quote in the world is, "The pain of discipline is nothing like the pain of disappointment." So discipline and process. And I learned, look, if I wanted to score 100, that's the dream. I couldn't do it without 100% attention on the next ball that I face. So that's process. If I get too caught up in 100, that's in the future. Or if I get too caught up in what happened, I got a duck 4 times in a row, I'm worried about the past. And that's what I'm talking about. The discipline is in your thing and concentrating what's important. If I want to run a marathon, you're 42 Ks down the track and there's the finishing line, that's awesome. But you can only do it by doing it one step at a time and having little goals along the way. So that's what I talk about, process. And, and to me, that's life. I mean, process, if you concentrate on every little moment, every little step, the outcomes will look after themselves. If you get too caught up in the outcome or the goal, then it becomes a distraction and you're forgetting about what's important. That's why discipline of the process is so important.
You also, in your home in Perth, where you are today, have this special quote wall. Can you tell me what that's all about and what's on it?
Oh, man, it's awesome. So when I first built this house 20 years ago, I used to always write down quotes. I love reading, And we built this house at the back of the property. I built a 5 metre by 5 metre room. It was all beautiful, and it was like my gym, or my yoga studio, my gym. And then the very first day, I took a big permanent marker, and on top of the wall, in big bold letters, the pain of discipline is nothing like the pain of disappointment. I remember my wife walking up, "What have you done? This beautiful room, what are you doing?" I said, "Get used to it, baby, because I'm right." And now that room's gone from 5 by 5, which is my gym. Then it became 10 by 5 metre room, which is my gym and my study. And now it's 15 by 5 metre room, but my daughter lives up there, my 24-year-old daughter. And I said to her, "You can decorate this however you like, but you can never touch these walls." And one day when my daughter moves out and I finish this job, I'm going to sit in the middle with my desk. I'm going to go to every single quote and I write a story about every single quote or scripture on that wall, because they're the people I've met, the teachers I've had, the experiences I've had. Oh man, it's an awesome space to be in.
Can you read a couple for us? Like, give us your favourite one at the moment.
Robert Frost, the great poet. Life can be summed up in 3 words. It goes on. No matter what happens, life goes on. I think the other powerful 2 words for me that over the 20 years, there's 2 words which are really important to me: let go. Let go. Let go. Just let go. You know, we try and control, and particularly in this COVID period, one of the great lessons I've learned, there's so much out of our control. And it's almost like a cliche now, control the controllables. But actually there's 2 more words or 3 more words, which is no greater word spoken. I think pressure and anxiety comes from trying to control things that are out of your control. So control the controllables, let go. I had lunch with Sir Alex Ferguson, the great Man United manager, before the 4th Test in England last year. And he told me 2 more words as well: truth works. Truth works. Tell people the truth. My nana's a legend, and she said to me once, "You always got a choice. You can lie or tell the truth. Tell the truth, because it's much easier. You might not think it at the time, but tell the truth. You don't have to have a very long memory, and you can sleep well at night." That's what my nana would tell me. So truth works. Tell the truth. But there's so many quotes up there. Like I say, it's a very long book.
You talk quite a bit about this letting go and that sense of just surrendering to things that you can't control. But of course, in elite sport, you've got such strong goals and you're always striving to get somewhere. So there must be a tension between really pushing yourself to the limit and then letting go.
Well, I think what I've learned is that the champions in life, in any art, what they strive for actually is simplicity, or what they learn is to bring it back to simplicity. So I think goals and dreams are really important, because they inspire you to get out of bed every day. But to achieve those, you have to bring it down to the most simple, basic philosophy of concentrating on of what's important. And you still have to work really hard on mastering your art, but you can only do that by breaking it down to one day at a time, one moment at a time. I remember my mum was sick. She passed away with ovarian cancer. We had a pact with each other, one day at a time. At next to my bed, I've got a big canvas in my bedroom, and it's a poem about one day at a time. And we can't control what happened yesterday, however good or however bad. You can't control what might happen to tomorrow. What you can control is what are you doing today. So I think that's mastery, is simplifying. Mastery comes in simplicity, in my opinion. Have your goals, but then break it down to the smallest of goals, which is one day, one moment at a time.
I reckon you've also had a challenge that a lot of leaders have, and I certainly had it in my career, where you grow up with people, you work with them in the workplace, your careers move ahead at the same time, and then suddenly you're given the role as the leader of the team and you're having to manage your friends. Can you still be friends with the players when you're the coach?
Well, of course. Yes, you can. relationships take time to build, right? So, and it's a really interesting point, because I think actually if you build relationships, when you're going to have tough conversations, because of respect, the tough conversations should become easier. But having said that, there's very, very few sports people who leave the game, and I can't talk for in the corporate world, but there's very, very few sports people who leave the game on their terms. So therefore, there's often, there's a degree of bitterness, and someone's got to take the blame for it, and it's often the person who makes the decisions, right? So I was really lucky. I mean, my last game of Test cricket, I retired with the great Shane Warne and the great Glenn McGrath. I was almost embarrassed to retire with those two because they were superstars. But we retired winning 5-0 against England, and I was batting with Matthew Hayden when we hit the winning run. So that is the fairy tale, but very few people get the chance to do that. So, and I'm mindful of that. There's very few leaders who I know who can be one of the boys.
You had to test that out pretty early on when you were coaching WA.
I did, yeah, and it's but it was important. I mean, we won a game, an impossible game, meant that we'd gone from rock bottom or a chance to make the Sheffield Shield final. We went out for dinner in Adelaide. We put on a nice show. Went back to the hotel. Everyone went back, high fives. Everyone singing Kumbaya. They're all happy. We're getting on the bus the next day, and we all went to bed because 3 days later we are playing Queensland to make the Sheffield Shield final from an impossible situation. Anyway, I jump on the bus the next morning, and a few of the guys jump on, and I went, "That's a bit strange." They were all really up, and one of them was my great mate Adam Voges, who took over from the Warriors job on my recommendation, or West Australian Cricket as the coach. Mike Hussey, Brad Hogg. These are my mates. These are my friends, right? But what had happened, they had tied one on. They'd gone out to a nightclub, and they'd got home at 4:00 in the morning, and we're on the bus at 7:00. And I remember thinking, sitting at the front of the bus going, okay, what are you going to, this is a crucible moment. What are you going to do? I got the job because of really bad behaviours. I got the job because of, alcohol and
turning it around, to be
else.
clear, not because you had bad behaviour.
No. Well, I wasn't in the team. I was assistant coach of the Australian team at the time. When I got the job, I got the job from an assistant coach. So, and West Australian Cricket had hit a low ebb because of bad behaviour off the field and on the field. And so I'm sitting there on the bus. What are you going to do, Justin? These are your mates. Are you going to let it go and be the good guy? And I'm going, no. And
which is the easy thing to do, right? The easy thing to do in that situation as a leader is to just go, can't be bothered, let it go.
Let it go, be popular, let it go, we'll deal with it. And I remember walking the change, I said, nah, that's it. This is your moment. And we were going to the airport, and I got the boys and I gave them a massive spray. I said, now get your running shoes on, get your running shorts on, let's go. And they're going, what do you mean we're going to go to the airport? I said, I do not care if we miss the plane. You guys, you know what your behaviours are. You know what the expectations are. Let's go. And there's at the Adelaide Oval, there's those big grass banks. Get going. And they're running up and down, and they're all vomiting, and they've been up to 3:00 in the morning, and they're looking at me. You're a psycho. I don't care. What do you stand for, Justin? What do you stand for? I keep saying that about leadership. What do you stand for? And they did it. And, eventually 45 minutes later, have a shower, get in the bus. We've got 5 minutes to get to the airport. Luckily, we found got on the plane. But you know what, Kelly? Was it scary at the time? Yes, it was. Do I regret it? Not for 1 millisecond. Did my players hate me at the time? Yes. Did they respect me afterwards? I'm sure they did. And my mates, who had been my teammates, they knew what I stood for. And guess what? The next 7 years, how many times do you reckon I had trouble with alcohol?
Yeah, not too many, I'm sure. Not too many.
No, I didn't, because we acted. And this is the thing about culture. Culture's behaviour. And if you haven't got the courage to step on it, whether it's positive or negative behaviour every single day, to me, that's what leadership's all about.
There's been some recent controversy around Tim Paine's language with umpires, and then also there's been the racist slurs thrown at some of the Indian players by fans this summer. What's been your approach in having to deal with all of those curveballs?
Yeah, well, they are curveballs and they're distractions. One, I said very, very publicly after the racial slurs at the SCG, one of my pet hates in life is I hate abuse. And look, I lived through, I hate it as a player, I hate it as a coach, I hate it as a spectator. When people pay their $20 or $30 or $50, come into a sports ground, I think they can say whatever they want. You know, I hate that. I mean, whether it's racially motivated or whether it's just abuse. I mean, I hate it. I mean, it's just really, it's discourteous and it's horrible. If you're on the receiving end of it, my gosh, it's no fun. It's like and this will probably make a headline. It's like Army. Everyone thinks they're hilarious unless you're on the receiving end of it. So the racial thing, that was a sin. I said that. I don't like any abuse. I mean, there was a lot talked about racial with the Adam Goods documentary, and it's obviously incredibly topical at the moment. I watched the documentary. I was so saddened by it, and people will just jump on board like sheep. It's not the right thing to do, abuse. So I hated that. With the Tim Paine one thing I know is when you set incredibly high standards, as a leader, you have to maintain it. Your reputation can be ripped down in 1 second. And he'll learn from that. He knew he hadn't done the right thing. My gosh, I say this with a smile on my face, but you can't, what I was used to growing up with and playing with, you've got to be so careful now, don't you? I mean, everything's recorded. Everything you do is recorded visually. Everything's recorded through the stump mic. You've got to be really careful. We know that. He made a mistake. He'll move forward from it, and it's something that we can talk about.
Will he remain in the team? There's a little bit of conjecture around, whether he should stay there, Justin.
100%. Yeah, I mean, if you look at what we've done in the last 2.5 years under his captaincy, he's been outstanding. Absolutely, he's a very, very good leader. Can he get better? Yep. Can I get better? Yep. Kelly, can you get better? Yep. Sure. Can anyone listen to this? Can you get better? Yep. So we're going to learn and get better. But he's been brilliant. And he will definitely remain as the captain of Australia.
India played really well, and I think Ian Chappell called it one of the best tests in a very long time. But of course, a loss at home, it's always hard. What did you say to the team after the match?
I said basically that, and it's hysteria. After the game, there's so much commentary, isn't there? There's going to be so much criticism. There's going to be criticism of the captain. There's going to be criticism of the coach. There's going to be criticism of the team. That's the world we live in, right? What I said to the team after is I could not care for one. I'll listen to the people I respect who have those comments, but I don't care what the outside world's saying as long as within these walls we know we have to get better, because these performances haven't been good enough. It's not what we expect in the Australian cricket team. As long as we're looking at how we can get better, I don't care what the criticism is, because there'll be plenty of it. And that's that's where I draw, the Theodore Roosevelt man in the arena. I mean, I remind myself of that all the time. It's easy to be a critic. It's easy for people to be critical. They don't understand that there's layers. They don't understand that there's been distractions. They don't understand that living in a hub for 9 months, which these guys have been doing. I didn't see my family for the first time in 50 years. I didn't have my family with me at Christmas time. I didn't see them for not 8 weeks over this festive period. All our players, Josh Hazlewood and Steve Smith, have not seen their partners for 5 months. People are so soppy old Australian cricketers, but you live in a hub where you can't have the normal. There's just people. We understand the layers to it. They take their toll. We got beaten by a very good Indian team. We'll learn from it. But as long as we learn from it, then the critics can say what they like.
Has it been difficult during COVID? You mentioned there's been some pros and cons. Life slowing down a bit has been sort of nice, and you guys not having to get on a plane all the time. But how has COVID impacted on the sport beyond the obvious?
Well, I'm on the board of the West Coast Eagles Football Club, AFL Footy Club. I have been for 3 years. And one of the biggest eye-openers of it's been one of the great professional and personal experiences of my life, for one. I love football, and I'm a fan of the West Coast Eagles, but I meet extraordinary people from the corporate world particularly. And back in the AFL season, for those who follow it, it was postponed after the first round. And the West Coast Eagles played on the Sunday, and it was postponed after their game. And on the Friday night, 2 days before, I was called to a board meeting, a West Coast board meeting, and I was told of the implications of COVID, and my jaw nearly hit the ground if the football was postponed for the season and the economic implications of that. And because of that learning, it became really relevant for me because we're in the business of sport, right? So I knew, and it cost our sport, as it did AFL, an extraordinary amount of money and time and stress to get India here, for example, or keep the show on the road with the Big Bash in our case. And it costs an extraordinary amount of money with the biosecurity and the, people are making decisions on life and death, not just on because of what had been happening around the world. So, there was huge complexity, and there's huge effort that goes into keeping the show on the road, if you like. But with that comes sacrifice and stress and tension. And we've certainly, whether it's in the footy world, rugby world, whether it's in the corporate world, whether you look at what's happening around America or England or all the other countries around the world, my life, there is no chance that life is simple at the moment.
The other curveball you faced came via a different kind of health crisis when you were suffering some really terrible migraines and vertigo. What happened?
Yeah, it was a horrible all last year, to the point in January where I was on the verge of saying, I can't do this anymore. But thankfully, I met some great medicos who have helped me significantly. And I'm thankful for that. I got this ringing in my left ear, then you get scared because my dad, 25, when he was my age, had a brain tumor on the nerve in his left ear, funnily enough. So then I'm thinking, I've got a brain tumor. That's it. And then I start reading Google like we all do, and there are similar symptoms. So I'm having brain scans. My brain was clear, thankfully. But I get this ringing in my left ear when we were in England last year. Before the World Cup started, I still had 4 more months in England. And so I have a brain scan, and then I get this vertigo, and then you feel sick the whole time. And then I'm feeling seasick every waking hour. Then I'm feeling like I'm drunk when I'm talking to people. I was all, hey, it was horrible. And it wasn't until January where I met some amazing people. I met an amazing vestibular physio. I met an amazing neurologist who then told me what was going on, and they helped fix it for me. But it's, and the other hard part about it, Kelly, it's not just the physical side of it. I talked about being the tough guy, being an Aussie bloke. I'm the Aussie Australian cricket coach. You've got to be the tough guy. You've got to put the mask on every day.
And I mean, I can't even imagine, because vertigo is a particular type of horrendous, like that sense of just being really nauseous all the time, how you can lead a team, deal with the media, rewatch matches, work out what the other teams are doing. Like, how did you even operate in those circumstances?
Well, I guess you talk about compartmentalising. And I was just trying to break it down. But again, you put the mask on. Then I'd go home every night, go to a hotel room or come home to my family. I'd just collapse because it's exhausting. I mean, not just the physical, how sick you feel, but it's the exhaustion of trying to act like there's nothing wrong.
Why did you feel like you had to act like that? Like, why not say to everyone, I'm really crook? Because you learnt. Remember, you learnt that this bottling up business doesn't work for you, Justin.
Yeah, it is. Well, I spoke to but the doctors knew what was happening. But I think that's the other thing about being a leader. You don't want to show any weakness, do you? But I've also learned in life, I mean, that it's almost the buzzword, vulnerability, that the great leaders also are really honest and open. And to the people who knew, who had to know, but again, we've got to get on with the job. Johnny Williamson true blue. You got to tie it up with wire and keep the show on the road. That's what we had to do. And that's what you've got. I had to do. I did it as a player. A lot of times I was physically injured. You got to just put on the game face and get on with it. Because that's just, I guess as a leader, you just got to often get on with it.
Justin, you are a person who's spent a lot of time thinking about what you stand for and what your leadership style is. But when you break it all down, what really is leadership for you?
Yeah, I agree. Leadership's about what you stand for. I think it's about leading by example. But I heard it in the winter. I heard it described so beautifully. They said leadership, the origin of leadership is leading the ship. And the captain of the ship needs to come out in a couple of different instances. One, when the iceberg presents. Think of the Titanic. That is, if the leader doesn't come out then, or the captain of the ship doesn't come out then, my gosh, you are going to hit and you're going to sink. And a lot of people are going to die, right? Or the second time the captain of the ship needs to come out is when there's choppy waters or you're in a storm. And you've got to use all your expertise to guide your way through the storm to get to the destination. And the third time the captain needs to come out is when there's mutiny on deck. That's when you use your man management skills and to make sure the mutiny doesn't take over and sink the ship again. The rest of the time, the captain needs to sit there and he makes sure the decks are in good order, make sure their people are in good order, and you just guide the ship, steer the ship to the next destination. And to me, that's what leadership's about. You think about this COVID period. In a lot of ways, COVID was the iceberg. Great leaders were able to steer their way through that period. And then, of course, came the uncertainty. And there's uncertainty in leadership, or they're the stormy waters. The great leaders, they steer their way through with their expertise. And then, of course, and we've seen it in every business, certainly seen it in sport, because there was redundancies, there was stand downs, there was stress for the future, there was uncertainty, mutiny on deck. That's where you've got to care for your people and you've got to make sure. And it's a great example. So leadership is leading the ship. The great captains come out in those three big times. The rest of the time, they trust their staff, they trust the people in their crew to get the job done. So to me, it's a really nice and simple way to think about what leadership's all about.
Justin Langer, what will be next for you? You spend a lot of time away, obviously, in a normal season. You must want to spend time at home again. I can't imagine what it's like for Sue and your girls. What are you thinking will be after this leadership journey?
Oh, there'll be more leadership somewhere.
What would you like to do?
What I'd love to do is I'd love to sit in that back room and reflect and write and reflect and write and share it with people. One of the great things about COVID, Kelly, and you'll understand this, I sit in this office and because of the test documentary, actually, first it started talking, everyone was inviting me to talk through Microsoft Teams or Zoom. Can you talk to my team? Can you talk to my... And I remember ringing, after I did about 20 or 30 of these, yeah, no worries, I talked to people. And then I rang my old speaking agent, Sheree Gardner, because I used to do a lot of corporate speaking, and I love it. It was one of the things that replaced batting for me because I get really well prepared. I get really nervous. I get up on the stage, I perform, and then I'd get like, yes, how good was that? And I'd get feedback, right? And then I'd get back. So I ring Sheree, and because I've been in this job, I had done zero speaking. I hadn't had time, I had no energy. I said, Sheree, I got this idea, right? Why don't we go out to the corporates and ask them if they're interested in doing it? Because no one can. And she goes, I've been waiting for you to ask me that. So then she went out to corporates, and all of a sudden I did about 20 corporate speaking gigs via Zoom. So I'm sitting there, and this is a secret, but I would give it away. I was sitting there with my jacket and tie on, my jacket and shirt and a pair of shorts and Uggies on. So it was all in winter time. And I'm doing it like this. And I was getting paid to do it. I was going, man, how good is this? So, sharing my lessons, sharing life. I'm involved with and have been for 20 years with some incredible charities, Children's Leukemia and Cancer Research, Solaris Foundation. I'm involved now with the EAR Institute, West Australia. Incredible charities. So, more time with that. That's leadership, isn't it?
Absolutely.
What I learned is this, and I kept saying it through that period. If this is my retirement, I will be the happiest bloke in the world. And that's a nice thing to look forward to, but still plenty of work to do with the Australian cricket team. I still love it. Plenty of challenges. I still love it. I'll keep doing it for a while, and then I'll go to the next chapter of my life after that.
I would like to ask you one final question, which is, who is the next coach of the Australian men's cricket team?
Who knows? Honestly, who knows? I mean, life's about timing, isn't it? I never would have thought. I made my debut for Western Australia as a cricketer, and I found out the night before because someone got injured, and I just happened to be the right person at the right time. I made my debut for Australia because Damien Martin, my great friend and my little brother, got injured, and I found out 24 hours before. I flew to Adelaide, made my debut. I came into the Australian job because of a scandal in Australian cricket. I came into the West Australian job because of a scandal in West Australian cricket. Kelly, it'll be the right person at the right time when the spot's available. Who knows?
Well, you'll certainly leave the game and the team and the culture in a lot of, in a much better state than you inherited it, and you've got so much to give other people. So I'm really grateful you could come on Curveball, because I think sport has so many parallels with business and leadership, and it's been so great to talk to you. Thanks, JL.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks for the invitation.
Curveball's a production of Dead Set Studios, and this episode was produced by me together with Rachel Fountain. For more on Justin Langer's incredible journey in leadership, subscribe to the Curveball newsletter on LinkedIn. We've popped some details on how you can subscribe in our show notes in this podcast. And if you're new to the show, welcome. Please subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. We've had so many great leaders who've been so candid in sharing their highs and lows, from startup junkie Michael Fox to comedy agent Kevin White. And next episode, you'll hear the incredible story of how Kate Morris of the online retailer Adore Beauty took her business from her garage all the way to the stock market with this risky high-growth strategy that nearly saw her company go under.
About 10 years in, the growth started to plateau off a bit. And I thought, if this is all it's going to be, then I don't know if I want to keep doing this. And so I went and paid a business coach. And she got me to write a letter to myself from 10 years in the future. And I thought, well, that sounds like a dumb idea, but I may as well do it. And honestly, it was like turning all the lights back on. Suddenly, the whole path was just illuminated for me. And I just went, oh, no, I do know what to do. And I was just completely reinvigorated.
That's Kate Morris, next on Curveball. And for more information about the leaders we feature or to suggest a guest, go to curveballshow.com.